Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of Talent Talks.
Ladies and gentlemen, what would all of you like more of? Quality, quality, quality.
Pull back, but they're also starting to, invest and innovate and grow.
That's where we should really be focusing instead of the bright and shiny.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of Talent Talks. I'm Jenn Terry, and you can find me online at @JTerryRecruit or on LinkedIn at Jennifer Terry Tharp. So if you have any questions about this episode or Joveo, feel free to reach out. I have an awesome trifecta today. I have myself, obviously, and then I have Dan, who is a return guest. Dan works with me here at Joveo. I can call you a friend now. We've been together for 9-10 weeks, we're old buds. So would you mind telling those that didn't listen to our last episode a little bit about you and what you do here at Joveo?
Sure, Jen. So Dan Sapir here. Hi, everybody. I've been in this job space for about 10 years at a number of different job sites and aggregators. At Joveo, I lead our business development efforts as well as our relationships with publishers.
Excellent. Publishers, a word, again, that I had no idea what it really meant when I was on the talent acquisition client side at AT&T. But now that I'm at Joveo, I realize it's a super huge part of the infrastructure and the ecosystem. And as part of my role, I get the chance to lead client advisory boards. And one of those is dedicated to publishers. I met my friend Michael Odell on our publisher advisory board, adored him. We had great rapport along with Dan. So I thought, why not pull him into Talent Talks? So without any further ado, Michael, you want to tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself and also about talent.com?
Sure. And I am a longtime listener, first-time caller, so glad to be on the show. I have been in the job space now for about 16 years. I spent my first 16 and a half, 14 years at Career Builder. And then in April of 2018, I came over to talent.com, and we were at that point known as Nuvu.com. I lead our U.S. efforts. The U.S. is one of the 79 countries in which we are a publisher, as Jen said. And the U.S. is our biggest market in our portfolio of countries. So glad to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And today's conversation, I really want to dig into some of the things that I've learned being on the other side and kind of what that means to talent acquisition professionals. So why don't we start with this, right? There's been a lot of change in the recruitment advertising industry over the last few years. You're starting to see, duration-based posts maybe wane a little bit, maybe other things kind of get a little bit bigger. I would be interested in the perspective of both of you on what's changed for job sites and aggregators. Michael, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I've really kind of built my career on watching that. When I started in this space, we were kind of doing evangelical sales to get people to move from the Sunday classifieds to online. And even that went from, using penny upgrades in 2001 to, buying big contracts with job boards. Today, it's moved even more. And I see the TA space, the talent acquisition technology space, kind of sitting usually 2 or 3 years behind the consumer space. So, in my job, I look out there to say, what's the consumer space doing now, and get ready for it because it's going to be here in 2 or 3 years. And that big trend right now that's hitting us is pay for performance, cost per click / programmatic. And you can call it whatever you want. The programmatic advertising, where we're letting data make the decisions, automation on where jobs are posted, how long they're posted for, how much you want to pay for it. And just the idea of, getting what you pay for and not the old post and pray, like we used to call it. You put up the job and hope something happens. There's a lot of technology, a lot of big data and automation that now we can say, here's the job, where should it go, and how much should I expect to get out of it? So we've progressed quite a bit in the past 2 or 3 years even.
So I'll never forget the day that I decided not to renew my $1 million contract with Giant Job Board. I'm not going to say who they were, right? No shade on this call. But I remember that moment and I thought, oh my gosh, this magic better happen, right? This real,
into the void.
I just sending it out into the void and hoping for the best, right?
Yeah.
So interested, Dan, as we have listeners here that probably are in different stages of that continuum, right? Like some are probably still buying really big post and pray contracts and that kind of deal. What sort of insight might you offer on just why programmatic? Why not the duration based or commodity style job boards?
Sure, and Michael actually talked about how quickly things have changed and how we're, as an industry, a little bit behind consumer advertising. I remember when I first got into this space, I started in sales, right? And the recruiter at the first company I was at in this space calls me up and kind of says, well, everyone else does pay per post and we're doing pay for performance. And, it was a time when that was widely adopted in consumer. And I was like, well, this is going to be the easiest thing in the world, right? And I start trying to sell to talent acquisition professionals and found a very different story. They just were not quite ready for that move at that time. A lot of the people we were talking to, right? So, when we think about where everything is today, I mean, in the US, you see a lot of people using pay for performance, but, they're not really digging super deep into the results and how different job types and job groups are seeing different results and things like that. And then when we kind of go overseas to certain European countries and other parts of the world, you still see markets where 70%, sometimes in certain countries, you're seeing 90% of the spend is still with pay-per-post, right? And certain pay-per-post sites work amazing. So it's not necessarily it has to be pay-for-performance, but everything needs to be measured. And what's great about programmatic is it kind of gives the ability to kind of level set that and make sure we're measuring everything. So like in the US, where everyone has these benchmarks and they know what their cost per application is, and sometimes they're even tracking to hire all the way downstream, and they have a very tight funnel end to end. Programmatic can come into that and say, well, guess what? We're plugging into hundreds to thousands of different sources, and on this site you might find that job seeker for $50 to apply, but guess what? I can find that same job seeker over here for a much more cost-effective manner, right? So all of a sudden, you're able to do more with the spend that you have. You can get to a place where you're, bringing more applicants in the funnel quicker and seeing hires quicker, right? So then move on to the next thing. Now, when we start talking about the European markets, it's a much different story where, they have less of this end-to-end funnel identified, and they're coming to programmatic sources like us and basically saying, help me identify what my benchmark should be, whether it's pay per post or pay for performance. Let me understand where that benchmark is with all of these. And then when I come to say, hey, where should I allocate my funds come renewal season, they have a better idea to where they can kind of do that. And then over time, we can continue to iterate and give them better and better results.
I think that's really interesting. And as an employer, right, when I made this transition, I had one goal in mind. That was to reduce cost, right? It was a very different time. We were in a place where there weren't enough applicants for all of the jobs. The competition to get eyes on those applicants was increased. And the reality was, by diversifying and potentially talking to hundreds of outlets, I could get more eyes on that prize, right? But so I want to spend a minute there, but then I want to talk about like something that maybe like I'm interested in your guys' perspective on. So Michael, before I move off of that, besides the broad distribution across many and setting the price at something like where you can get it sometimes at a discount, what other benefits would you just sort of lift up to the general talent acquisition leader on why programmatic?
Yeah, and Dan, you made some great points. This is especially true in the United States. We have a very competitive and fluid marketplace for PPC and programmatic. There are places in Europe that are starting to get there, like the UK, France, maybe Germany to a degree. But most of the world does not have a big enough infrastructure yet to be primary PPC, pay for what you get players. It's coming though. And what we've seen from a change in the PPC space was starting here at when it was Joveo, it was, can you give us clicks? Can you even get clicks in the door? And then that went to, can you get us clicks at a decent price? And then it was, can your clicks that you get for us turn into decent applications at a decent price? And now it's that further down funnel, can you actually deliver hires to me? And at how much? And were they quality? So we've seen that movement go quite a bit, but what are the advantages? So now that we're there, yeah, you can track it from end to end, very much like consumer marketing. You have to work with your ATS and your TA stack partners to do it, but we could tell you exactly where that job seeker came into the process. How many of those job seekers fell off in your application process? How quickly did your recruiters get to them and engage that job seeker? And then, how long did it take and how much did it cost and where did that job seeker come from? So there's a lot of tracking and a lot of data that really will help people make decisions. And there's a lot of options. One of the things that we here at talent.com love is the fact that we have partners like Joveo. Now, Joveo is not the only game out there, of course, but having a middleware partner that helps us take this big chunk of jobs and confine or to bring it into a smaller chunk of jobs to say, we want to advertise these jobs to these people at this price. It's very helpful. And we saw that in the 30-day posting world too, right? The 30-day posting, the post and pray world was nothing until eQuest and Broadbean came out and said, here's an easy way to get your jobs out to the places you need to go. You're not having your recruiter spend 20 hours a week cutting and pasting job descriptions. And so the tools like what Joveo offers helps us to really knock down that friction between us and other job boards too, and our customers, the enterprise employers out there. So yeah, and I think we're going to see more and more adoption of it as time goes on. Pay for performance is just more flexible. There's more options. It's not always cheaper, honestly. I know that a lot of people have Indeed contracts that are bigger than 10 times bigger than anything they ever spend at one of the traditional boards, but it gives you control over your spend, what you do with your spend, and who sees the jobs. It's a much better model for the employer. Not always finance people at the job board, but it's a much better model for the employers.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, when I was sitting in that employer chair, what really was the impetus to this for me is that I cut the number of job postings or the number of jobs that I was filling substantially, right? Like over the course of 1 year, we went from building out a huge infrastructure network for a TV product to we're done. So, right. So all of those contracts that I had negotiated with kind of the post and pray players, I had way too many jobs in my inventory. I didn't need that many. I was locked into a price. And the reality was, I needed to be able to predict things better, right? Predictability was a huge deal. Okay, so I mentioned I was going to throw a sort of weird curveball at you. So when this all came about, really the business case for this was more candidates, more eyes on your jobs, that sort of deal. But the reality is now we have several employers out there that have had to cut their TA staff.
Yeah, for sure.
They don't have as many jobs open. There's more job seekers. So just throwing this out here, I look at programmatic as a way to actually stop candidates from pooling in your ATS or whatever, right? Get the right candidates for the right price and then stop if you have enough so that we don't have a ton to go through. Do you see that as a good use of programmatic?
I personally do. I remember there was an example that when I first learned about programmatic, somebody told me, if you're buying a 30-day job posting, that's like going to a Hilton hotel, say, hey, I need to spend 3 nights here. And they said, that's cool. It'll be, $5,000 for 30 nights. You only need to stay at Hilton for 3 nights. So why are you paying for a whole month? And that's absolutely accurate with programmatic. You get your jobs in there, you get what you need. And then you pull it down. So you're not hamstrung with that inventory number, right? If you have 3 openings, then post 3 openings. If you have 3,000 openings today, then post 3,000. We're getting into the time of the year now, fourth quarter, when retail, logistics, warehousing, and stuff like that is going to get really big for the holiday seasons, right? So the great thing about programmatic, whether it's me or somebody else, is you can spend all your money into Q3 and Q4 to get folks there for the holiday season, but never spend a dime in January, February, March if you don't need people. It's much more flexible. It matches revenue spikes with expense spikes instead of having something that's just contracted out, and gives you the flexibility you need to make changes if something weird happens, like COVID.
Totally. And it's interesting, right? This kind of brings us to where I want to wrap us up. And that is just the whole theory of doing more with less. So for a lot of our listeners, they've done exactly what you just said, Michael. COVID hit, requisitions got pulled back, staff got cut, and now all of the sudden, we all know what happens at, holiday season. But so now things are starting to tick back up. They don't have the same amount of people. Their budgets may have been cut, all of those things. So I'll start with you, Dan, and then I'll flip over to you, Michael. Just knowing that the majority of our viewers here are talent acquisition leaders, what would you say if you were to give them just an elevator pitch on how can programmatic help them do more with less? Dan, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think the crux of it is it helps you reach the right candidates wherever they might be, right? So the problem with, and even when you're using a single pay for performance site, or two or three, right? You have a few agreements in place, and if you really wanted to find every place and you wanted to cut agreements with everyone, all of a sudden you're dealing with 1,000 different agreements, 1,000 different IOs, 1,000 different things you're trying to optimize to, and no one has time for that, especially when they're short-staffed and they're trying to hire more people, right? So, programmatic even helps with that, that top of the funnel part of it. And then once in the door, we can kind of help decide where those jobs should go based on what we know. Like, we have a ton of data coming into our system saying, hey, this site's going to work in this way, this site's going to work in that way. I think actually a perfect example, is, we have a large client who hires, in a bunch of different categories. Their average click to apply rate is about 11%. And, somebody like talent is actually like 30% conversion rates better than that, right? Which is really powerful, right? And so we have that data that says, well, let me shift as much budget that way as possible because they're making really good matches. And this actually goes into, Jen, what you were talking about earlier, where you don't want to sift through just candidates. You want the right candidates in the door as well. And, we look at the data like click to apply rates that gives us a good leading indicator that talent is surfacing the right jobs to the right job seekers. They're converting at a better rate than others, which means that in all likelihood, downstream, they're going to see better applies to hires and so on. So it saves a lot of people a ton of time throughout the ecosystem.
Totally. And that's why it's something like Joveo that sort of learns as it goes and helps you determine the efficacy of individual sources, right? That'll make that even cleaner. So really good points. Michael, you have a good perspective, right? Like, you're on the publisher side. What would you say if you had some advice for talent acquisition leaders on doing more with less or making it through this last part of the year?
Yeah, I feel like you've been eavesdropping on all of our sales calls because that's what we talk about is doing more with less. I come from a world where it was very much a zero-sum game, right? You had these two, maybe three for a couple of years, 2 or 3 huge boards, and it was, site A wants to kill site B. I want your entire budget and nobody gets anything else. And that in the old 30-day post and pray world was very much operated out of this sense of scarcity, right? The difference is you have this whole other industry on the PPC programmatic world where we have a sense of abundance. As a matter of fact, we all get together and talk about best practices because we understand that there's this huge market out there and we should just all do better for each other. There's a huge pie and everybody's piece is fine. It's great, it's big. So let's go out there and do better and work on the customer experience. And why is that good? There's lots of reasons why it's good. But I think one of the biggest ones is in the old days, we asked you, Jen, at AT&T, we asked you to make one buying decision a year, right? Round about December 15th, we'd come and, get you a glass of wine, sit down at the cocktail bar and say, Jen, are you doing it again? Are you going to give us $1 million, whatever it was? And full transparency, you were not my customer. But that's how we dealt, right? Are we doing it? You made that one purchase decision a year. You signed on the dotted line. You gave us $1 million. It's not like that anymore.
No.
Today with programmatic, the onus is on me and my peers, the publishers, to make sure that we're delivering quality and consistency every single day. It gives you guys, the buyers, the opportunity to make a new purchase decision. And usually you don't make it, you let your technology make it, which makes it even easier. But you get to make 365 purchase decisions a day. Do I do business with talent today? Yeah, they did great yesterday. Do I do business with talent today? Yeah, they did great yesterday. I might have a bad day and you say, I'm going to take 2 or 3 days off, and that's fine. The onus is on us to make sure that we're delivering. So it's a much better situation for the buyer. You guys kind of have the upper hand in the industry, and it's beholden on us to deliver. So we work harder for you.
Well, and to be real honest, you do deliver, right? And it keeps you working to make sure that you have the most relevant results, and that it just improves the whole ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was going to recap this for the viewers, here's sort of what I would take away from today's episode. Number one, if you're not already using a programmatic provider, contact us. Hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on LinkedIn, go to the Joveo website. We can help you at least evaluate that. One of the biggest benefits to doing that is that you get access to outlets like talent.com, where you may not want to individually contract, once a year, as Michael was saying, but that you want them as part of your ecosystem, so you have choice and you have leading indicators that tell you how those choices will perform, equaling predictability. And if you can decide what you're paying on a daily, monthly, quarterly basis, you can decide where you're paying it because the performance is there, then you're really in a position where you can control not only your costs, but your work. And that makes us more predictable and a better partner for the business. So, Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate you agreeing to be my guest and to have a good time. And Dan, you sort of have to because you work with me. And but Michael, I do. I appreciate it so much. And we'll have you back again. I love the conversation.
Right on. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Bye, guys.